Hey guys, tonight we were stepping back, way back, into a moment in history that's both famous and, in its own way, quietly absurd. Picture this: the Aegean sun beating down, the shimmer of heat rising from parched earth, and the distant, unsettling pop-pop-pop of rifle fire. You're surrounded by young men, far from home, their faces a mixture of bravado and a nervousness they try hard to conceal. This isn't a holiday postcard, though the water looks deceptively inviting. This is Gallipoli, 1915, and the air is thick with dust, flies, and the scent of wild thyme crushed underfoot. And you probably wouldn't enjoy the sanitation standards, or lack thereof. Dysentery, as you might imagine, was decidedly not a charming holiday ailment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel, more than you know. And if you feel like it, drop a comment down below telling us where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see where our little community of history whisperers is spread across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the gentle sway of the transport ship beneath your boots, a motion that's become second nature over the past few weeks. But this morning, the rhythm is different, punctuated by a deeper thrum of engines and a subtle tension that crackles through the packed ranks of soldiers. Out there, through the haze of dawn, a rugged, inhospitable coastline looms. It's Turkey, the Gallipoli Peninsula. It doesn't look like the heroic landscapes you might have imagined from recruitment posters. It looks steep and rather barren. The official objective, whispered down the ranks, is to seize control of the Dardanelles Strait, a key waterway that would allow Allied ships to link up with Russia and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. A grand plan, hatched in distant war rooms, now meeting the very gritty reality of this formidable shoreline. The Gallipoli campaign officially kicked off on April 25, 1915, a date now seared into the national consciousness of Australia and New Zealand. As you're rowed towards the shore in a clunky, wooden landing boat, packed in like tinned sardines if sardines wore heavy woolen uniforms and carried rather cumbersome rifles, you catch your first proper look at what will become known as Anzac Cove. The cliffs rise almost sheer from a narrow, pebbly beach. Scrubby, tenacious bushes cling to the slopes, their colors muted under the already strengthening sun. There's a distinct lack of welcoming beaches or gently sloping hills that would make an amphibious landing, shall we say, convenient. It's almost as if the planners picked the spot with the dart, blindfolded, after a particularly long lunch. You can't help but think that whoever signed off on this particular landing zone perhaps had a strong dislike for ankles. The air smells of salt, damp wood from the boat, and a faint, acrid scent that you can't quite place yet but will soon become horribly familiar. The sounds are a confusing medley. The rhythmic splash of oars, the gruff orders of NCOs, the nervous coughs of your comrades, and an intermittent, angry buzzing, like a swarm of giant, metallic bees. That would be the bullets. You're one of the Anzacs, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, a collection of young men, many of whom had never left their home countries before this grand, terrible adventure. Some are seasoned soldiers from the Boer War, but many are fresh-faced volunteers, full of a potent mix of imperial loyalty and a thirst for what they believed would be a short, sharp, glorious war. Stepping onto the beach, or rather, stumbling onto it as the boat grounds abruptly, your boots sink into a mixture of shingle and surprisingly soft sand. It's a chaotic scene. Men are trying to form lines, officers are shouting to be heard above the din, and already, the first casualties are being tended to with a grim efficiency that chills you despite the heat. The landscape is utterly alien. Those steep hills are now towering over you, deeply eroded gullies and ravines carving shadowy lines up their faces. This isn't the rolling green countryside of home. This is hard, unforgiving terrain, baked by centuries of sun. You can see why they call this the toehold. It feels exactly like that, a precarious grip on the very edge of a hostile continent. One of the quirkier aspects of these early moments, something you observe as you try to get your bearings, is the sheer inadequacy of the maps. Some soldiers were issued with guides that were, to put it mildly, optimistic, showing terrain features that simply didn't exist or misplacing vital landmarks. It's said that some of the early intelligence was based on tourist maps or ancient charts, which, while perhaps charming for a leisurely sail, proved somewhat less useful for a full-scale military invasion. This cartographical confusion undoubtedly contributed to the units landing in slightly the wrong places, often facing even tougher ground than anticipated. Historians still ponder why exactly the initial landings, particularly at Anzac Cove, were directed towards such naturally defensible and difficult terrain, when other, potentially more accessible, beaches existed nearby. Was it poor intelligence, a miscalculation of Ottoman preparedness, or simply the terrible dice roll of war? You crane your neck, looking up at the heights. Somewhere up there are the Ottoman defenders, well entrenched and with a commanding view of everything happening below. You can't see them, but you can feel their presence, an unseen enemy holding all the topographical cards. The sun climbs higher, beating down relentlessly. Your woolen uniform, so smart and soldierly back in training, now feels like a personal sauna. Already you're thirsty. The Gallipoli campaign would quickly teach everyone about the critical importance of water, a lesson learned the hard way by thousands. For now, though, you just squint against the glare, try to make sense of the shouted commands, and take in the daunting, sun-baked reality of your new, temporary, and very dangerous home. The adventure has begun, and it looks nothing like the brochure. The initial chaos of the landing slowly, painstakingly, gives way to a grim sort of order. There's no grand advance, no triumphant sweep inland as some might have hoped. Instead, you find yourself digging, and digging, and then, for a change of pace, digging some more. Your hands, already blistered from the oars, are now raw from the pick and shovel. The earth is a stubborn, rocky mix, interspersed with tough, stringy roots from the ubiquitous scrub. You are carving out a precarious existence on these hostile slopes, creating the trenches that will become your world. These aren't the neat, orderly trenches you might have seen in diagrams. They are jagged, irregular scars clawed into the hillside, often dictated more by the terrain and the immediate need for cover than by any grand tactical plan. You learn very quickly that any ground given is almost impossible to retake, and so every inch is defended with a fierce, desperate tenacity. You settle into a routine that is both monotonous and terrifyingly unpredictable. Before dawn, there's the stand to, a period of heightened alert when everyone lines the parapet, rifles ready, peering into the gloom for any sign of an Ottoman attack. This is a standard practice in trench warfare across all fronts during the Great War, the pre-dawn and dusk hours being favored times for assaults. As the sun rises, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that seem almost offensive in their beauty given the surroundings, the tension eases, but only slightly. Then comes the daily grind, deepening the trenches, repairing damage from the previous night's shelling, fetching rations and water, a perilous task often done under sniper fire, and trying to maintain some semblance of hygiene in conditions that are, frankly, appalling. The trenches are narrow, often no more than a couple of feet wide, and perhaps 6 or 7 feet deep if you're lucky. You're constantly brushing against your comrades, the smell of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and damp earth a permanent fixture in your nostrils. Dust is everywhere. It coats your uniform, gets in your food, irritates your eyes, and lines your throat. And then there are the flies. Oh, the flies! They arrive in biblical plagues, drawn by the unburied dead, the latrines, and any scrap of food. They are bold, persistent, and utterly disgusting, crawling on everything and everyone. You try waving them away, but it's a futile gesture, like trying to stop the tide with a teaspoon. Some men fashion makeshift fly whisks from scraps of cloth or horsehair, a small, almost comical defiance against an overwhelming nuisance. The sanitary arrangements are primitive, to say the least. Latrines are often just pits dug a little way back from the main trench, and they become breeding grounds for disease. Dysentery and typhoid fever spread rapidly, weakening men almost as much as enemy bullets. You quickly learn the importance of keeping your head down. Ottoman snipers are excellent, and they have the advantage of higher ground. Any incautious movement, any moment of carelessness, can be fatal. The crack of a sniper's rifle becomes a chillingly familiar sound, often followed by a sickening thud, or a cry cut short. Historians still ponder why exactly the Ottoman forces at Gallipoli, often underestimated by Allied command before the campaign, proved to be such formidable and resilient defenders. Their tactical use of the terrain, combined with a fierce determination to protect their homeland, created a defensive line that the Anzacs and other Allied forces could simply not break. Despite the constant danger, there's also an incredible amount of boredom. Hours can stretch into an eternity, filled with nothing but the buzzing of flies, the distant rumble of artillery, and the gnawing anxiety of what might happen next. Men try to pass the time in various ways, writing letters home, heavily censored of course, playing cards with worn, greasy packs, reading tattered newspapers months out of date, or simply staring into space, lost in their own thoughts. You see resilience, yes, but also the slow erosion of spirit that comes with prolonged exposure to stress and deprivation. The humor, when it comes, is often dark and cynical, a coping mechanism against the ever-present shadow of death. You might hear a comrade quip, after a particularly close shell burst, "Well, the Kaiser almost got my laundry bill that time." It's not hilarious, but it breaks the tension, just a little. One quirky tidbit from this period is the prevalence of improvised trench weapons and tools. With official supplies often slow to arrive or inadequate for the unique conditions, soldiers became masters of invention. They fashioned periscopes from polished bully beef tins and scraps of mirror to observe enemy lines without exposing themselves. Grenades were sometimes made from jam tins packed with scavenged explosives and metal fragments. It was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of desperate circumstances, though you suspect the official army quartermasters back in Blighty would have had kittens if they saw some of the contraptions. These homemade devices were a common feature across many static fronts in World War I, showcasing the resourcefulness of the average soldier. The nights are often worse than the days. The darkness brings a heightened sense of vulnerability. The enemy is out there, unseen, and every rustle of leaves, every dislodged pebble, sounds like an approaching patrol. Flares occasionally light up the landscape in a ghostly, magnesium glare, freezing everyone in place, before plunging you back into an even deeper blackness. Sleep is fitful, snatched in short bursts, often sitting upright in the trench, your rifle always within reach. You dream of soft beds, clean sheets, and meals that don't come out of a tin. You dream of home. But then you wake up, stiff and cold, to the familiar discomfort of the trench, the taste of dust in your mouth, and the knowledge that another day of the same grim routine has begun. You might even joke to your neighbor, "Another glorious day in paradise, eh? Wonder if the flies have unionized yet for better feeding grounds." It's a grim existence, a far cry from the adventure you signed up for, but it's your existence now, shared with thousands of others clinging to this precarious foothold on a hostile shore. Into this landscape of entrenched infantrymen, another group begins to arrive, their presence initially a source of some curiosity, and perhaps even a little confusion. These are the men of the Australian light horse. You watch them disembark, not with the thunder of hooves and the jingle of cavalry tackle you might associate with their name, but on foot, just like every other poor soul condemned to this vertical battlefield. Their horses, their pride and joy, the very essence of their identity as mounted riflemen, have been left behind in Egypt. There's simply no place for cavalry in the precipitous, trench-scarred terrain of Anzac Cove. It's a bitter pill for these men to swallow. They are horsemen without horses, a mounted force now tasked with fighting as infantry. This transformation was a significant moment, highlighting the brutal adaptability demanded by modern warfare. The traditional roles of cavalry were rapidly becoming obsolete in the face of machine guns and entrenched positions, a lesson learned painfully across all World War I fronts. You see them trying to adjust, these sunbronzed men from the Australian bush, stockmen, farmers, and shearers, renowned for their horsemanship and independent spirit. Their uniforms are slightly different, often featuring distinctive emu plumes in their slouch hats, a proud symbol of their regiments. There's a certain swagger about them, even without their mounts, a confidence born of wide-open spaces and a life spent in the saddle. Now, they're confronted with the claustrophobic reality of trench warfare, the endless digging, the constant vigilance, the sheer, grinding discomfort. You can almost see the bewilderment in some of their eyes as they trade the freedom of the gallop for the confines of a muddy ditch. One might overhear a light horseman grumbling to his mate, "Reckon a bloke could swing a cat in here, if he had a very small cat and wasn't too fond of it." They bring with them their own particular skills and a slightly different mindset. Many are crack shots, honed by years of hunting or controlling vermin on vast pastoral properties. They are accustomed to hardship and making do with little, which stands them in good in the deprived conditions of Gallipoli. But the transition to infantry tactics isn't always smooth. They have to learn the intricacies of trench routine, the art of the grenade, the brutal ballet of a bayonet charge, skills that are quite different from a cavalryman's charge across open country. Historians still ponder why exactly the High Command persisted for so long with the idea of a decisive cavalry breakthrough in World War I, even as evidence mounted that such tactics were largely suicidal against modern firepower. Perhaps it was the lingering romance of the mounted charge, a reluctance to abandon centuries of military tradition. You observe them integrating into the existing trench systems, sometimes forming their own sections of the line, sometimes being used as reinforcements, or for particularly hazardous tasks. There's a bit of friendly rivalry, perhaps, between the established infantry units and these newcomers. The infantry might see the light horsemen as a bit green when it comes to the specifics of trench life, while the light horsemen, in turn, might view the entrenched infantry as having lost some of their dash. But these are superficial differences. Under fire, they are all Anzacs, bound by a shared experience of danger and privation. The necessity of their dismounted role here was a stark illustration of how the nature of warfare was changing. The Australian light horse, conceived as a mounted force for colonial defense and expeditionary warfare, found itself adapting to the static, attritional fighting of the Gallipoli Peninsula. A quirky tidbit from this period involves the light horsemen's distinctive slouch hats. While practical for keeping the sun off, they weren't exactly designed for the cramped conditions of a trench. Men would often have to tilt them at awkward angles or even temporarily remove them when navigating particularly narrow or low sections of trench, lest they snag on a timber support or, worse, attract a sniper's attention above the parapet. It's a small detail, but it speaks to the daily, minor irritations and adjustments that soldiers had to make. You might see a tall light horseman, plumes askew, muttering about the indignity of it all, having to practically crawl to avoid giving a Turkish sniper an easy target. They also bring stories of Egypt, of training camps near the pyramids, of bustling Cairo bazaars, and of course, of their beloved horses whalers, a breed renowned for its toughness and endurance, ideally suited to the harsh Australian outback and, it was thought, to campaigning abroad. The longing for their mounts is palpable. You hear them talking about their horses with an affection usually reserved for family members. For a light horseman, his horse wasn't just transport. It was a partner, a companion, a living extension of himself. To be separated from them and thrust into this infantryman's hell must have been a profound psychological blow. One can only imagine their frustration, trained for mobile warfare, now stuck in static trenches. It would be like asking a fish to climb a tree, possible, perhaps, with enough effort, but decidedly not its natural element. Despite their initial disorientation, the light horsemen adapt with the characteristic resilience of the Anzacs. They learn to use the pick and shovel as effectively as any infantryman. They become adept at the grim routines of trench life. And their marksmanship, honed on the plains of Australia, proves invaluable in the daily duels with Ottoman snipers. They may have arrived as horsemen without horses, but they soon proved themselves to be formidable soldiers in this new, unwelcome environment, contributing their unique spirit and skills to the beleaguered Anzac garrison. You see their plumed hats becoming just another familiar part of the dusty, khaki landscape of the cove, their initial unfamiliarity fading as they become absorbed into the relentless, grinding machinery of the Gallipoli campaign. The daily reality of Anzac Cove settles into a harsh, grinding rhythm, a metronome of discomfort and danger. You're now intimately familiar with the geography of this tiny, precarious foothold, the steep, eroded slopes of Pluggy's Plateau, the deadly exposure of Russell's Top, the relative shelter of Shrapnel Gully, a name that tells its own story, and the chaotic sprawl of the beach itself. This narrow strip of land, barely a few hundred yards deep in most places, is your entire world, and it's a world under constant, unrelenting pressure. The official name given to this landing area by General Birdwood was Anzac Cove, a name that would forever be etched in history. The shelling is a constant companion. It might be a sporadic, harassing fire, single shells whistling in to explode with a deafening crack, sending earth and shrapnel flying. Or it might be a concerted barrage, a terrifying drumbeat that shakes the ground and frays the nerves, forcing everyone to cower deep in their dugouts, praying the next one doesn't have their name on it. You learn to distinguish the different sounds, the incoming whoosh of a Turkish, Asiatic Annie, or Beachy Bill, nicknames given to particularly troublesome enemy guns, versus the outgoing bark of your own field artillery, which is often outnumbered and outgunned. The Ottoman artillery, positioned on the commanding heights surrounding the cove, has a terrifying advantage, able to rain down shells with impunity. You feel terribly exposed, like ants on a picnic blanket about to be stomped. Water, or the lack of it, becomes an obsession. The initial landings had wildly underestimated the difficulty of securing a reliable water source. The engineers work miracles, digging wells and developing condensers to desalinate seawater, but the supply is always meager, strictly rationed, and often brackish or tainted. You queue for your daily water bottle, a precious, inadequate amount that has to last for drinking, washing, a laughable concept most days, and occasionally, trying to clean your rifle. Thirst is a constant companion, a dry, rasping feeling in your throat that no amount of saliva can assuage. The water often tastes of chlorine, used to purify it, or sometimes, disturbingly, of the petrol tins it might have been transported in. One particularly grim joke circulates. The water here comes in 3 flavors: mud, salt, and dead mule. And the flies, remember the flies? They seem to get worse, if that's even possible. They feast on the dead, on open latrines, on scraps of discarded food, and then they land on you, on your face, in your mouth, on your food. They are a constant, maddening presence, a living symbol of the squalor, and decay that permeates Anzac Cove. Dysentery, spread by these same flies and contaminated water, is rampant. It saps your strength, leaves you weak and dehydrated, and makes the already grim business of trench life almost unbearable. The medical facilities, though staffed by dedicated and heroic doctors and orderlies, are overwhelmed. They operate in stifling dugouts or flimsy tents, often under fire, struggling with a constant stream of wounded and sick, their resources stretched to breaking point. The sheer number of sick, particularly from enteric diseases, became a major factor in the campaign's eventual failure, debilitating more men than enemy action at certain points. Food is another joyless affair. The staple is bully beef, tinned corned beef, hardtack biscuits, so hard they're rumored to be able to stop a bullet, or at least break a tooth, and jam, usually plum and apple, which quickly becomes monotonous. Fresh food is a distant memory, a forgotten luxury. You try to make the bully beef more palatable by frying it, if you can scrounge enough fuel for a small fire, or mashing it with crushed biscuits. But mostly it's eaten cold, straight from the tin. You dream of fresh bread, of fruit, of a meal that doesn't taste of tin and preservative. The lack of fresh fruit and vegetables also led to outbreaks of scurvy, further weakening the men. A quirky tidbit from this period is the Anzac wafer, a particularly hard biscuit that soldiers often soaked in tea or water to make it edible, or ground up to thicken stews. Some even used them as makeshift postcards, writing messages on them before trying, usually unsuccessfully, to post them home. Despite the grimness, there are moments of camaraderie, of shared laughter in the face of adversity. You might share a cigarette with a mate, huddled in a dugout during a shelling, or exchange sardonic comments about the latest rumor sweeping the trenches, usually wildly inaccurate, but a welcome distraction nonetheless. These small human connections are vital, a lifeline in the overwhelming tide of misery. You see incredible acts of bravery, not just in battle, but in the everyday endurance of these appalling conditions. Historians still ponder why exactly the men at Anzac Cove, facing such overwhelming odds and enduring such terrible privations, maintained their cohesion and fighting spirit for so long. Was it national pride, loyalty to their comrades, a stubborn refusal to yield, or a combination of all these factors, forged in the crucible of shared suffering? The nights offer little respite. Patrols venture out into no man's land, a terrifying, cratered landscape of tangled wire and listening posts, probing enemy lines or trying to repair their own defenses. The darkness is alive with whispered commands, the soft thud of sandbags being placed, the occasional flare that momentarily illuminates the desolate scene, and the ever-present threat of a sudden, brutal encounter with an enemy patrol. Sleep is a precious, fleeting commodity, often interrupted by alarms, shelling, or the simple, gnawing discomfort of trying to rest in a cramped, damp hole in the ground. You might wake with a start, your heart pounding, unsure if the sound that woke you was real or just the product of your exhausted imagination. The constant strain begins to wear everyone down, etching lines of fatigue on young faces, dulling the initial spark of adventure into a weary, stoic resignation. The reality of Anzac Cove is a far cry from any romantic notions of war. It is a brutal, exhausting, and fly-blown existence on a tiny, contested patch of earth. Amidst this unrelenting grimness, this daily diet of dust, danger, and dysentery, a rather unexpected idea begins to germinate. It starts, as these things often do, as a whisper, a half-joking suggestion muttered in a moment of boredom or perhaps a desperate yearning for some semblance of normalcy. The idea? Cricket. Yes, cricket. That most quintessential of summer games, a sport synonymous with village greens, leisurely afternoons, and the gentle thwack of leather on willow. It seems almost laughably incongruous, a surreal notion to even contemplate in the blood-soaked, shell-pocked landscape of Anzac Cove. You can imagine the initial reactions: a raised eyebrow here, a snort of disbelief there. Cricket? Here? Are you off your rocker, mate? Yet the idea doesn't die. It persists, takes root, and begins to spread, particularly among the Australian light horsemen. These are men who, back home, would have lived and breathed cricket during the summer months. It was more than just a game. It was a part of their culture, a shared passion that transcended social barriers. The thought of playing, even for a few hours, offers a tantalizing glimpse of a world beyond the trenches, a brief escape from the relentless present. It's a testament to the human spirit's desire for recreation and a touch of home, even in the most dire circumstances. Sporting activities were, in fact, encouraged by some commanders during World War I where conditions permitted, as a way to maintain morale, physical fitness, and a sense of unit cohesion. The chief proponent of this audacious plan is said to be a Major G. H.L. Harris of the 7th Light Horse Regiment. He, along with others, starts to scout for a suitable location. This, as you can imagine, is no easy task. Anzac Cove isn't exactly blessed with an abundance of flat, open spaces suitable for a cricket pitch. Most of the terrain is either steeply sloped, heavily cratered, or dangerously exposed to enemy fire. The search itself becomes a small adventure, a reconnaissance mission with a rather unusual objective. You might see a group of officers, perhaps with a couple of keen NCOs, peering through periscopes or furtively scanning patches of ground, not for enemy machine gun nests, but for a strip of land that might, with a lot of imagination and even more work, serve as a wicket. The logistical challenges are, of course, immense. Where would they find a bat? Balls? Stumps? These aren't standard issue items in a war zone. But necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, and the Anzacs are nothing if not inventive. Rumors begin to circulate about a bat being fashioned from a piece of scavenged wood, perhaps a packing crate or a discarded piece of trench timber. Stumps might be improvised from wooden posts or even ammunition boxes. As for the ball, well, that's a trickier proposition. Perhaps a tightly wound bundle of rags and string, or maybe, just maybe, someone has managed to smuggle a real cricket ball ashore, a treasured possession from a previous life. The resourcefulness required would have been considerable. One can almost picture a quartermaster scratching his head, being asked for 3 reasonably straight sticks and a roundish object, not too explosive, if you please. Historians still ponder why exactly, amidst such deprivation and constant threat, the idea of a cricket match gained such traction. Was it a defiant gesture, a way of showing the enemy and perhaps themselves that their spirits were not broken? Was it a deep-seated cultural need for the familiar rituals of home? Or was it simply a desperate craving for any kind of distraction, however brief, from the horrors of their daily existence? It's likely a combination of all these things, a complex human response to an inhuman situation. The risks are undeniable. Any gathering of men in an open area would be a tempting target for Ottoman artillery or snipers. The chosen location would need to offer at least some modicum of cover, or be situated in an area that was, for whatever reason, less frequently shelled. This is not like organizing a village fete where the biggest concern is whether the tea urn will work. Here, the stakes are life and death. The very idea seems reckless, almost bordering on madness. Yet, the allure of the game, the promise of a few hours of normal, proves too strong for some. It's a classic example of the gallows humor and calculated risk-taking that often characterize soldierly life. You might hear a soldier joke. Well, if a shell gets me, at least I'll go out chasing a cover drive, not dysentery. The planning continues, perhaps in hushed tones in dugouts or during lulls in the fighting. Teams are informally selected, probably based more on enthusiasm and availability than on any strict adherence to cricketing prowess. The news of the impending match would spread through the nearby trenches, a ripple of excitement and disbelief. For many, it would be something to look forward to, a tiny beacon of light in a very dark tunnel. The anticipation itself would be a morale booster, a topic of conversation that isn't about shelling, or rations, or the ever-present flies. It's a little piece of home, miraculously transplanted to this alien and hostile shore. The very audacity of the idea, playing cricket within range of enemy guns, speaks volumes about the Anzac spirit, that blend of courage, irreverence, and an unshakable desire to make the best of a bad situation, even if making the best involves dodging shrapnel between overs. The chosen location for this improbable sporting endeavor is a patch of relatively flat ground near the beach, inland from Aribrinda Point, in an area that would eventually become known as Shell Green. The name itself is a darkly ironic testament to its surroundings. It wasn't green with lush grass, but rather pockmarked by the craters of countless artillery shells. It did, however, offer a modicum of shelter from direct observation from some of the key Ottoman vantage points, though by no means was it entirely safe. It was, perhaps, the best of a very bad selection of options, a compromise between the desire for a playable surface and the absolute necessity of not becoming immediate target practice. This area was also near a field hospital, adding another layer of grim reality to the proceedings. Now you find yourself part of an impromptu groundskeeping crew, tasked with preparing this patch of shell-scarred earth for something resembling a cricket pitch. Forget the meticulously manicured lawns of Lord's or the MCG. This is Gallipoli groundsmanship, a far cry from the gentle art practiced back home. Your tools are entrenching spades, picks, and perhaps a few commandeered brooms if you're lucky. The first job is to clear the debris, rocks, shrapnel fragments, spent bullet casings, and the general detritus of war that litters every square inch of Anzac Cove. You and your comrades work with a quiet determination, an almost reverent focus on this bizarre task. It's a welcome change from digging trenches, even if the purpose is decidedly unusual. The pitch itself is a strip of sun-baked earth, hard and uneven. There's no hope of a grassy wicket here. The best you can do is try to level it out somewhat, remove the worst of the stones, and perhaps sweep it clear of loose dust. You might see men on their hands and knees, meticulously picking out small pebbles, as if preparing for a test match, though the only test here is one of survival. The outfield, such as it is a patchwork of scrubby bushes, more shell holes, and uneven ground. Fielding will be an adventure in itself, a twisted ankle a distinct possibility for any batsman ambitious enough to try for a quick single. One of the quirkier aspects of the preparation involves the boundaries. There are no neat white lines here. Boundaries are likely defined by natural features, a particular bush, the edge of a trench, or perhaps a discarded ammunition crate. I'll run for if it hits the medical tent, lads, but try not to, The work is carried out with a strange mixture of diligence and nervous haste. Everyone is acutely aware of the risks. Ottoman observers on the heights of Chunik Bear or Sari Bear could, at any moment, spot this unusual activity and decide to liven things up with a few well-aimed shells. You work with one ear cocked for the telltale whistle of an incoming round, ready to dive for cover at a moment's notice. It's probably the only cricket pitch preparation in history conducted under the potential gaze of enemy artillery spotters. Historians still ponder why exactly the Ottoman forces didn't more aggressively target such gatherings when they occurred. Perhaps they were conserving ammunition, or maybe, just maybe, there was a moment of bemused curiosity on their part, wondering what on earth those crazy Australians were up to now. As you help clear a particularly stubborn patch of thorny scrub, you can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. Men are risking their lives, not for a strategic objective, not to gain a yard of contested ground, but to play a game of cricket. It's a profoundly human act, a stubborn refusal to let the war extinguish every spark of joy, every semblance of normal life. The mainstream historical fact here is that recreational activities, including impromptu sports, were not entirely uncommon in quieter sectors of the front lines during World War I, serving as vital outlets for soldiers. However, staging a game in such an exposed and active combat zone as Anzac Cove was exceptionally bold. The equipment begins to materialize, looking as improvised as the pitch itself. A bat, possibly shaped from a piece of deal wood with a draw knife, looks more like a primitive club than a Grey Nichols. The stumps are 3 rough sticks, perhaps branches from a resilient olive tree, hammered into the unyielding earth. 4 bales, maybe a couple of spent cartridges or carefully balanced pebbles. The ball, if not a precious smuggled-in original, might be a tightly bound sphere of rags and string, its bounce unpredictable, its trajectory a mystery. You can imagine a soldier, a former carpenter perhaps, painstakingly whittling the bat, taking a craftsman's pride in this absurd creation. He might joke, "She's not a beauty, but she'll send a few Turkish googlas to the boundary, I reckon." The atmosphere during this preparation is unique. There's a sense of anticipation, a nervous excitement, but also an undercurrent of shared understanding. Everyone involved knows this is a temporary reprieve, a fleeting moment of make-believe in a world that is all too real. But for now, they embrace the task, finding a strange solace in the familiar actions of clearing ground, marking out a space, and preparing for a game. It's a small act of defiance against the chaos and destruction surrounding them, a way of reclaiming a tiny piece of their humanity. You look at the emerging pitch, a dusty, uneven strip of dirt, and a wry smile plays on your lips. It's the worst cricket ground you've ever seen, but in this moment, under the hostile Gallipoli sun, it feels like the most important field of play in the world. The stage is almost set for a game that will become legend. The day of the legendary cricket match arrives, a sliver of surreal normalcy inserted into the brutal Anzac Cove timeline. It's not a scheduled event in any official capacity, more of an opportunistic seizure of a lull in the fighting, perhaps a period when the ever-watchful Ottoman gunners are occupied elsewhere, or maybe just taking a tea break of their own. You find yourself among the players and spectators, a loose gathering of khaki-clad figures, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and the ingrained weariness of frontline soldiers. The location, as we know, is Shell Green, that ironically named patch of dubious flatness. The air is still thick with the usual Anzac perfumes, dust, sweat, antiseptic from the nearby dressing station, and the faint, lingering scent of cordite. But today, there's an almost palpable buzz of something different, something decidedly non-military. The game begins. Imagine the scene. The pitch is a strip of hard, sun-baked earth, probably giving unpredictable bounce to the improvised ball. The fielders are scattered amongst the scrub and shell holes, their slouch hats tilted against the glare. Batsmen, perhaps with pads fashioned from sandbags or wearing none at all, take their guard. The bowler, likely using a modified, shortened run-up to accommodate the uneven ground, trundles in. There's a crack or maybe more of a dull thud, depending on the quality of the bat and ball, and the game is on. This match, often cited as occurring on December 17, 1915, took place during a period of relative quiet, shortly before the final evacuation, though impromptu games likely happened at other times too when conditions allowed. The cricket itself is probably not of the highest standard. This isn't Bradman at the SCG. The conditions are ludicrous. A well-struck boundary might end up in a machine gun emplacement. A midfield could involve scrambling into a trench. But the spirit of the game is there, undeniably. you hear the familiar shouts. How's that? For an appeal, the encouraging, well bowled, or the groan of, oh, Butterfingers, after a dropped catch. For a few precious moments, the men are transported away from the grim realities of their situation. They are not just soldiers in a deadly war. They are cricketers, mates, enjoying a game in the sun, however precarious that sunlit moment might be. And then, inevitably, comes the interruption. A distant, ominous whistle, growing rapidly louder. Incoming! The shout goes up, and the game dissolves in an instant. Players and spectators dive for the nearest cover: shell holes, shallow depressions, the sides of trenches. You press yourself flat against the earth, heart pounding, as a Turkish shell screams overhead and explodes with a deafening roar, perhaps 100 yards away, perhaps closer. Dust and debris rain down. The air shimmers with the concussion. It's a stark reminder, if any were needed, that this is no ordinary village green. This is Gallipoli, and the game is played on borrowed time, under the very noses of the enemy. One soldier might quip, after the dust settles, reckon that was their google. Bit wide of off stump though. Once the immediate danger passes, and after a quick check to ensure no one has been hit, the players slowly, cautiously emerge from their cover. There might be a moment of hesitation, a shared look. Is it worth continuing? The answer, invariably, seems to be yes. Brushing dust from their clothes, perhaps with a nervous laugh or a muttered curse at the Turk Fritzes, for their unsporting interruption, they retake their positions. The game resumes. This pattern play, interruption by shelling, take cover, resume play becomes the bizarre rhythm of the shell-green cricket match. It's a testament to their resilience, their stubborn refusal to be cowed, or perhaps just their desperate need for this brief, shared escape. Historians still ponder why exactly this specific game, among others that might have occurred, captured the imagination and became such an enduring symbol. Perhaps it was the timing, so close to the end of the campaign, or the sheer audacity of it in such a famously lethal environment. Or maybe it's simply that the image of men playing cricket under shellfire perfectly encapsulates the Anzac spirit of making the best of things, with a dash of laconic humor and a disregard for personal danger. The quirky tidbit here is that some accounts suggest that the Ottoman troops, observing this peculiar activity from their trenches on the hills above, were utterly bewildered. There are anecdotal stories, though hard to verify, of Turkish soldiers ceasing fire at times, simply to watch the strange spectacle unfolding below them. Whether this was out of curiosity, a grudging respect for the enemy's bizarre courage, or simply because they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing, is impossible to say. It's a charming thought, though a momentary, unspoken truce born of mutual bewilderment. Imagine a Turkish officer looking through his binoculars, muttering to his sergeant, Ahmed, are those infidels dancing? No, wait, they're hitting a ball with a stick. Allah preserve us, they truly are mad. The shell-green game wasn't a single, continuous match, but likely a series of short, interrupted sessions whenever a lull allowed. Each resumption of play was an act of defiance. The fielders spread out again, ever watchful not just for the ball, but for the telltale signs of incoming artillery. The batsman takes his stance, perhaps glancing nervously towards the enemy lines before focusing on the bowler. The sounds of the game, the thwack of the bat, the calls of the players mingle with the distant, ever-present rumble of war, a surreal soundscape that could only exist in a place like Gallipoli. For these men, it was a small victory, a moment of stolen joy in a landscape of sorrow. As you observe the unfolding drama on shell green, you begin to pick out individuals, not just the khaki mass. There are the keen organizers, perhaps bustling about with an air of importance, ensuring the rules, whatever improvised version they're using, are being adhered to. Then there are the natural athletes, the ones who, even in these ridiculous conditions, display a flash of skill, a well-timed stroke, or an agile piece of fielding that momentarily makes you forget you're in a war zone. You see the enthusiastic but less gifted, their efforts more comical than competent, yet their participation just as vital to the spirit of the occasion. Remember Major G. Chell Harris of the 7th Light Horse, often credited as a key figure in instigating these games? He was likely present, a leader not just in military matters but in this unusual form of morale boosting. Among the players, you'd find men from all walks of life, a cross-section of Australian and New Zealand society, united by their uniform and their current predicament. There might be a tough-as-nails shearer from the Queensland outback, his movements economical and powerful, bowling with a surprising pace off a few short steps. Beside him in the field could be a clerk from a Sydney counting house, perhaps less physically imposing but no less determined, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose as he peers at the batsman. You see farmhands, shop assistants, lawyers, and laborers, all temporarily shedding their civilian identities and their military ranks to become simply batsman, bowler, or fielder. This leveling effect of sport is one of its enduring appeals, even here, surrounded by the strict hierarchies of the army. There are likely some well-known sportsmen among them, men who had played cricket or other sports at a high level back home. Their presence would add a frisson of excitement, a touch of class to the improvised proceedings. For instance, Captain Tom Richards, a Wallaby rugby international who also served at Gallipoli with the 1st Field Ambulance, was known for his sporting prowess. While it's not definitively recorded if he played in this specific shell green game, men of his athletic background would have been natural participants in such activities. Their involvement would lend a certain authenticity to the match, a reminder of the organized sporting world they had all left behind. The spectators, ringing the ground, at a safe-ish distance, or peeking from the entrances of nearby dugouts, are as much a part of the scene as the players. They offer vocal encouragement, good-natured heckling, and expert, often unsolicited advice. "Give him the Google it, Bill! Don't just stand there looking pretty, run, you drongo!" Their laughter, when it comes, is a precious sound, a brief, bright spark in the gloom. For these onlookers, the match is a welcome distraction, a live performance in a theater of war where the usual entertainment is far more deadly. They follow the fortunes of the improvised ball with an intensity that belies the absurdity of the setting. A well-hit 6, perhaps into a patch of thorny scrub that serves as a de facto boundary, is greeted with cheers as hearty as any you'd hear at a packed stadium. One quirky tidbit about the personalities involved is the likely presence of the larrikin element. The Anzacs were renowned for their irreverent sense of humor and a certain anti-authoritarian streak, often referred to as larrikinism. You can imagine a few such characters providing a running commentary, full of witty sledges and exaggerated complaints about the umpiring, probably just a long-suffering NCO roped in for the duty. "Oh, are you blind? That was plumb LBW. My old mum could have seen that from back in Wagga Wagga." This kind of banter, even in the face of danger, was a crucial coping mechanism. The game also highlights the diverse skills within the light horse. While renowned as horsemen, many were also all-round country sportsmen. Their hand-eye coordination, honed from years of farm work or hunting, would translate well to batting and fielding. Their natural fitness and resilience would allow them to endure the physical exertion, even in the oppressive heat and difficult conditions. You might see a light horseman, lean and wiry, dive full length to take a spectacular catch in the outfield, landing with a thud in the dust, and then spring up grinning, ball held aloft, as if he just won the Ashes. Historians still ponder why exactly the Australian light horse, in particular, became associated with these impromptu sporting activities at Gallipoli. Was it their slightly more independent command structure, their background as men used to organizing their own recreation in isolated rural communities? Or simply the fact that, as a dismounted cavalry force, they had a particular need to maintain esprit de corps in a role for which they weren't originally intended? Whatever the reason, their involvement in the shell green cricket match has become a key part of their legend. The stars of the game are not necessarily the most skillful, but perhaps the most enthusiastic, or the ones who manage to hit the ball furthest, or those who provide the most entertainment with their fielding blunders. Each participant, whether a dashing batsman, a wily bowler, or a spectator shouting encouragement from the sidelines, plays a part in this extraordinary human drama. They are ordinary men, caught in an extraordinary and terrible situation, finding a moment of grace and shared humanity in the simple act of playing a game. You watch them, these fleeting heroes of shell green, their faces animated, their movements energetic, and for a moment, you can almost forget the war that rages just beyond the boundary line. For those few precious hours, as the improvised game unfolds on shell green, an almost magical transformation occurs. The oppressive weight of Anzac Cove seems to lift, just a little. The constant, gnawing anxiety that is the background hum of life here recedes, replaced by the simpler, more immediate concerns of the cricket match. Will the next ball take a wicket? Can the batsman reach that crudely marked boundary? Will young Bluey Smith finally manage to hold on to a catch? The familiar sounds of warfare, the distant crump of artillery, the occasional crack of a sniper's rifle are still there, a sinister counterpoint to the game, but for a while, they are relegated to the periphery of consciousness. The dominant sounds become the thwack of the improvised bat hitting the equally improvised ball, the calls of the players, the shouts of encouragement, and most wonderfully, the sound of laughter. You watch as men who, just hours before, might have been exchanging fire with the enemy, or cowering from a bombardment, or mourning a fallen comrade, are now fully engrossed in the timeless rituals of cricket. Their faces, usually taut with tension or masked by a weary indifference, are animated. There are smiles, frowns of concentration, grimaces of effort, and triumphant grins. For this brief interlude, they are not just cogs in a vast military machine, but individuals expressing themselves, competing, and collaborating in a shared, joyful activity. This psychological respite, however fleeting, was incredibly important. The ability to switch off, even partially, from the horrors of war could mean the difference between maintaining sanity and succumbing to shell shock, or combat fatigue, terms that were beginning to enter the lexicon to describe the psychological wounds of this new, industrialized warfare. The focus narrows to the small dramas of the game. A fiercely contested LBW appeal, argued with all the passion of a test match, even though the umpire is probably just a mate chosen for his perceived neutrality, or perhaps his loud voice. A spectacular dive to stop a boundary, resulting in a mouthful of dust and a round of applause. A classic catch, fumbled, leading to groans and good-natured jeers. These are the universal moments of cricket, played out here in the most unlikely of stadiums. You see officers playing alongside enlisted men, rank temporarily forgotten in the camaraderie of the game. A private might bowl out a lieutenant, and for that moment, the usual hierarchies are inverted, replaced by the simple dynamic of batsman versus bowler. This brief respite isn't just for the players. The spectators, clustered in whatever relatively safe spots they can find, are equally absorbed. They are living vicariously through the men on the field, their cheers and groans a collective release of pent-up emotion. The game provides a shared topic of conversation that isn't about death, or disease, or the seemingly endless stalemate. It's a reminder of home, of peaceful summer afternoons, of a life beyond the trenches. You might see a soldier, his face grimy, his uniform tattered, a weary look in his eyes, suddenly break into a broad grin as a batsman smacks the ball for an improbable 6. It's a small thing, but in this place, small things can have a huge impact. One quirky tidbit related to such respites is the soldiers' ingenuity in creating other forms of entertainment. Besides impromptu sports, they organize sing-alongs, illicit gambling schools, two-up being a particular Anzac favorite, and even put on makeshift concerts or theatrical performances in dugouts or sheltered gullies. These activities, often frowned upon by stricter elements of the high command, were vital for morale. The ability to laugh, to sing, to engage in friendly competition, was a way of asserting one's humanity in the face of dehumanizing conditions. Historians still ponder why exactly these moments of normalcy, like the shell green cricket game, were so powerfully resonant and so important for soldier morale. Was it the stark contrast with the surrounding brutality that made them so precious? Or was it the reassertion of cultural identity and shared values in an alien and hostile environment? Perhaps it was simply the human need for play, for a temporary escape from overwhelming stress, a need that persists even in the most extreme circumstances. For these few hours, you feel a lightness in the air, a sense of camaraderie that transcends the grim business of war. The sun beats down, but it feels less oppressive. The flies are still buzzing, but they seem less annoying. The ever-present danger is momentarily forgotten, or at least pushed to the back of the mind. It's as if the simple act of playing cricket has created a small, temporary bubble of peace in the midst of chaos. You see men teasing each other, slapping each other on the back, sharing a swig from a water bottle, small, human interactions that are the lifeblood of any team, military or sporting. The game provides a structure, a set of rules, a clear objective, in a world where everything else seems random and senseless. The focus on the next ball, the next run, the next wicket, is a welcome relief from the larger, unanswerable questions about the war and their chances of survival. Even the arguments with the umpire are a form underscore of normalcy, a familiar ritual. He was at least 3 yards out, You need your eyes tested, a frustrated bowler might exclaim, only half joking. It's a scene that could be from any cricket pitch in the world, yet it's happening here, under the guns of Gallipoli. As the strange game of cricket unfolds on shell green, with its intermittent pauses for incoming artillery, you can't help but cast a thought towards the heights overlooking Anzac Cove. Up there, in their own network of trenches and gun emplacements, are the Ottoman soldiers, the Johnny Turk of Anzac slang, a term often used with a mixture of apprehension and a grudging respect. What must they have made of this bizarre spectacle? You imagine a Turkish machine gunner, or an artillery spotter, peering through his binoculars at the small figures moving about on that dusty patch of ground below. He's expecting to see soldiers digging, or carrying supplies, or perhaps the preparations for an attack. Instead, he sees men hitting a ball with a stick, running back and forth, and occasionally diving for cover when one of his own side shells lands too close for comfort. The scene must have been utterly perplexing. Cricket was not a game familiar to the Ottoman Empire. Their traditional sports were very different: wrestling, archery, equestrian games. This leisurely, almost ritualistic activity, punctuated by sudden bursts of frantic action and equally sudden prostrations to avoid shrapnel, would have seemed alien, perhaps even decadent or foolish. One can picture an Ottoman officer reporting to his superior, "Sir, the Australians, I believe they are engaging in some sort of ritualistic sun worship involving wooden planks and a leather sphere. Or perhaps they are just mad." This cultural disconnect is a fascinating aspect of the Gallipoli campaign, where two very different worlds collided. There are, as mentioned, anecdotal accounts suggesting that at times, Turkish firing would slacken or even cease while these games were in progress, while concrete evidence for a deliberate, chivalrous, "let them play" policy is scarce, it's plausible that individual Turkish soldiers or gun crews might have held their fire out of sheer curiosity or bemusement. They were, after all, human beings, and the sight of their enemy engaging in such an inexplicable and seemingly harmless activity might have piqued their interest more than their aggression, at least for a short while. The mainstream historical fact is that unofficial, localized truces or lulls in fighting for various reasons, like collecting wounded, or even just mutual exhaustion, did occur sporadically on the Western Front and at Gallipoli, though they were rarely sanctioned by high command. You wonder if any of them recognized it as a sport at all. Or did they perhaps interpret it as some strange form of training exercise? Or, even more cynically, did they see it as a sign of Allied complacency or deteriorating morale? Look at them, wasting time on games while the war rages. The Ottoman soldiers were known for their tenacity and fighting spirit, defending their homeland with a fierce determination. They were not an enemy to be underestimated, and their perspective on the Anzacs' behavior would have been shaped by their own cultural norms and military doctrines. Historians still ponder why exactly the Ottoman perception of Allied morale and intentions, based on observations like these, if they were indeed clearly observed and understood, didn't lead to different tactical responses. Perhaps such isolated incidents were too small to register significantly in the grand scheme of their defensive strategy. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to the Ottoman perspective involves the diaries and letters of Turkish soldiers. While direct mentions of witnessing cricket matches are rare, unsurprisingly, given the game's obscurity to them, their writings often reveal a mixture of respect for the Anzacs' bravery and a deep bewilderment at some of their Western customs and behaviors. They saw the Anzacs as tough fighters but also, at times, as strangely informal or undisciplined compared to their own more hierarchical military culture. The idea of officers and men playing a game together so casually might have seemed particularly odd. Imagine the conversation in a Turkish trench. "What are they doing down there, Ali?" "I don't know, Mehmet. First they run, then they hit the little ball, then they all fall down when Sergeant Hassan sends a greeting. Then they get up and do it again. Very strange. Perhaps it is a new form of drill to improve their speed in taking cover? Perhaps. Or perhaps the sun has cooked their brains." The notion that the enemy might be watching, and wondering, adds another layer of surrealism to the shell-green game. It's like performing a play for an audience that doesn't understand the language or the plot. The players themselves were probably aware of this potential observation. Perhaps it even added a certain defiant spice to their actions, a sense of, "Let them watch, let them wonder." It was a small way of asserting their presence, their uncrushed spirit, not just to themselves but to the enemy who held the high ground and, seemingly, all the advantages. The Ottoman soldiers were enduring their own hardships, shortages of food and ammunition, the strain of constant vigilance, and heavy casualties. Their experience of Gallipoli was just as brutal, if not more so, than that of the Anzacs. From their perspective, looking down on the cove, they saw an invading force clinging precariously to a tiny strip of their homeland. The sight of these invaders pausing their efforts to conquer in order to play a game might have elicited a range of reactions, from contempt to confusion, or perhaps even a fleeting, unacknowledged moment of shared humanity, recognizing the universal need for respite, even if the form it took was utterly bizarre to them. The echoes of that cricket game, and the imagined Turkish bewilderment, add a poignant and uniquely Gallipoli flavor to the story. You can almost hear the faint, ghostly sound of a Turkish bugle call drifting down from the hills, a counterpoint to the equally ghostly thwack of bat on ball from shell green. All too soon, the fragile bubble of the cricket match bursts. Perhaps the light begins to fail, casting long, eerie shadows across shell green. Or maybe a more sustained and accurate bout of shelling signals that the unofficial, unacknowledged truce, if there ever truly was one from the Ottoman side, is definitively over. Whatever the trigger, the game peters out. Bats are leaned against dugout walls, the improvised ball is pocketed, and the players, no longer cricketers but soldiers once more, begin to disperse, melting back into the labyrinth of trenches and shelters that make up Anzac Cove. The brief respite is over, and the grim reality of war, which was never truly absent, reasserts its dominance with a vengeance. You feel the shift in atmosphere almost immediately. The laughter and light-hearted banter fade, replaced by the familiar curt commands, the weary sighs, the clink of equipment as men prepare for the routines of the evening stand to patrols, ration parties. The heightened senses, temporarily focused on the flight of a ball or the position of a fielder, now revert to their wartime sharpness, alert for any sign of danger, any change in the enemy's activity. The memory of the game, so vivid just moments before, begins to feel like a dream, a strange, sun-drenched interlude in a relentless nightmare. Did that really just happen? Did you really just watch men playing cricket, dodging shells, in this godforsaken place? The return to the trenches is a return to the constant awareness of mortality. The smell of cordite might seem sharper now, the distant crackle of rifle fire more menacing. The camaraderie of the game, while real and valuable, gives way to the more somber bonds of shared hardship and imminent danger. You might exchange a look with a fellow spectator or player, a silent acknowledgement of the surreal experience you've just shared, but there's little time for reflection. The war waits for no one. The demands of trench life are immediate and unrelenting. This rapid switch back to combat readiness was a grimly learned skill for soldiers on all fronts. The equipment from the game, the rough-hewn bat, the lumpy ball, the makeshift stumps, is probably stowed away with a strange sort of reverence, or perhaps just tossed into a corner, their brief moment of glory over. They are potent symbols of that fleeting escape, talismans of a normalcy that seems a million miles away. Will they be used again? Perhaps. But no one can say for sure. The future at Anzac Cove is measured in hours, not days or weeks. One mainstream historical fact is that the Gallipoli campaign was characterized by long periods of static trench warfare, punctuated by brutal, costly offensives. These lulls, when sports like cricket could even be contemplated, were precious and rare. As darkness falls, the familiar anxieties creep back in. The shadows lengthen, playing tricks on the eyes. Every rustle in the scrub could be an Ottoman patrol. The thought of no man's land, that terrifyingly empty yet potentially lethal space between the lines, reasserts its chilling presence. You check your rifle, ensure your ammunition is handy, and settle in for another long night of vigilance. The brief joy of the cricket match serves only to highlight the stark contrast with the pervasive misery and danger of your everyday existence. It's like a single candle lit in a vast, dark cavern, beautiful and defiant, but ultimately overwhelmed by the surrounding blackness. Historians still ponder why exactly the memory of the shell-green cricket match, and similar small acts of defiance or recreation, endured so strongly in the collective memory of Gallipoli. Was it because they represented a triumph of the human spirit over adversity? Or did they serve as a necessary counter-narrative to the overwhelming story of suffering and loss, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there were moments of light? Perhaps it's because these stories make the almost unimaginable scale of the conflict relatable on a human level. A quirky tidbit from the aftermath of such brief respites might be the souveniring that occurred. A soldier might pocket a particularly smooth stone from the pitch, or a splinter from the improvised bat, as a memento of the occasion. These small, personal tokens, often carried for the remainder of their service or even brought home, were tangible links to moments that transcended the brutality of war. They were little anchors to sanity, reminders of shared experience and fleeting joy. You might see a digger quietly tucking away a misshapen lump of stitched rag that served as the ball, a small, secret smile on his face. Something to tell the grandkids, eh? If I ever get to have any. The echoes of the cheering and the thwack of the bat fade quickly, replaced by the familiar, grim symphony of the front line. The men who were, for a few hours, carefree cricketers, are now once again soldiers, peering into the darkness, their lives hanging by a thread. The shift is jarring, a brutal return to earth after a brief, exhilarating flight. The cricket game, now a rapidly receding memory, serves as a poignant reminder of everything they are fighting for, and everything they have lost by being here. The dust settles on Shell Green, now just another anonymous patch of dangerous ground, its brief, glorious career as a cricket oval already fading into legend. The war, relentless and unforgiving, grinds on. The cricket match on Shell Green, though a fleeting moment in the grand, terrible sweep of the Gallipoli campaign, becomes more than just a curious anecdote. It solidifies into a symbol, an emblem of what came to be known as the Anzac spirit. You see this spirit in the faces of the men around you, in their actions, in the way they endure the unendurable. It's a complex blend of courage, resilience, mateship, dark humor, and a profound, almost stubborn refusal to be beaten by circumstance, no matter how dire. The very idea of playing cricket under shellfire is, in itself, a perfect encapsulation of this spirit, a kind of cheerful defiance, a thumbing of the nose at danger and despair. This Anzac spirit wasn't something that was consciously manufactured by generals or propagandists. It grew organically from the shared experiences of the men themselves, forged in the crucible of Anzac Cove. It was born in the terrifying chaos of the landing, nurtured in the squalor and camaraderie of the trenches, and tested daily by enemy fire, disease, and deprivation. You see it in the way men share their last cigarettes, or their meager water rations, or risk their lives to bring in a wounded comrade from no man's land. This concept of mateship, a deep, unspoken loyalty to one's comrades, became a cornerstone of the Anzac legend, and it was evident in every aspect of life at Gallipoli, from the frontline trenches to the makeshift cricket pitch. The cricket game, in its beautiful absurdity, highlights several key components of this spirit. There's the ingenuity fashioning a playable game out of scavenged materials in a hostile environment. There's the courage playing on, even with shells bursting nearby. There's the irrepressible humor, the ability to joke and find moments of levity even when surrounded by death and destruction. And above all, there's the resilience, the capacity to bounce back from adversity, to snatch moments of normalcy and joy from the jaws of hell, and to carry on despite the overwhelming odds. You hear it in the casual way a soldier might refer to a near miss from a shell. Close shave that one, but a miss is as good as a mile, eh? The story of Shell Green, as it begins to circulate through the trenches and beyond, contributes to this burgeoning identity. It's a story that resonates because it's so quintessentially Anzac, a little bit mad, a lot brave, and utterly unforgettable. It demonstrates a refusal to let the war define every waking moment, a determination to retain some semblance of humanity and cultural identity. This spirit became a defining characteristic of Australian and New Zealand soldiers, recognized by both their allies and their enemies throughout the First World War and beyond. The Gallipoli campaign, despite being a military failure, was paradoxically a crucible for national identity for both Australia and New Zealand. Historians still ponder why exactly the Gallipoli campaign, more than other equally brutal World War I battles, played such a foundational role in shaping the national psyches of Australia and New Zealand. Was it the birth of a nation narrative, the idea that these young countries proved their mettle on the world stage? Or was it the sheer distance from home, the sense of isolation and self-reliance that fostered such strong bonds among the men? Perhaps it was the uniquely challenging nature of the terrain and the tenacity of the Ottoman defense, which created a particularly intense and defining experience. A quirky tidbit related to the enduring Anzac spirit is the language and slang that developed at Gallipoli. A rich, colloquial lexicon emerged, full of uniquely Australian and New Zealand terms, often laced with dry humor and understatement. Words like digger, for an Anzac soldier, bloke mate, bonzer, good, and various colorful expressions for the enemy or the unpleasant conditions became a shared code, reinforcing their distinct identity and camaraderie. This slang was a way of coping, of creating a sense of belonging, and of subtly asserting their difference from the more formal British Army. You might hear someone describe a particularly heavy bombardment not as terrifying, but as a bit of a rough trot. You see the Anzac spirit not just in grand gestures of heroism, but in the small, everyday acts of endurance. The soldier who meticulously cleans his rifle despite being racked with dysentery. The cook who somehow conjures up a hot meal from bully beef and hardtack under shellfire. The signaler who repairs a broken telephone line in the dead of night, with snipers active all around. These are the quiet acts of courage and dedication that, multiplied by thousands, keep the Anzac foothold alive. The cricket match is simply a more flamboyant, more visible manifestation of this same underlying spirit. The men who played and watched that game on Shell Green didn't think of themselves as creating a legend. They were just trying to get through another day, to find a moment's relief from the strain of war. But in doing so, they inadvertently forged an image that would endure for generations, an image of ordinary men displaying extraordinary resilience and an unquenchable zest for life, even in the shadow of death. This spirit, born amidst the dust and flies and bullets of Gallipoli, would become a touchstone, a source of pride, and a defining characteristic of how these nations saw themselves. The echoes of that defiant game of cricket continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of the human will. The brief, sunlit interlude of the cricket match, that small pocket of defiant normalcy on Shell Green, eventually fades into the relentless, brutal rhythm of the Gallipoli campaign. While such moments of respite were precious, they were ultimately just tiny islands in a vast ocean of conflict. The overarching reality of Anzac Cove was one of constant pressure, culminating in major, bloody offensives. One such period of intense fighting that starkly contrasted with the casual bravery of an improvised cricket game was the August Offensive of 1915. This was a massive, complex series of attacks designed to break the deadlock and seize the commanding heights of the Sari Bear Range, Chinook Bear, Hill Q, and Hill 971. You find yourself caught up in the preparations for this major push. The atmosphere in the trenches shifts from the grinding monotony of static warfare to a palpable, nervous tension. There's an increase in activity. Fresh troops and supplies are brought ashore, often under the cover of darkness. Ammunition dumps are built up, and orders are whispered down the line. The relative quiet that might have allowed for a cricket game is shattered by the increased tempo of artillery fire from both sides, as each tries to soften up the other's positions or disrupt their preparations. The August Offensive, which began on August 6, 1915, was the Allies' most significant attempt to break out from the Anzac and Suvla Bay beachheads. The plan is ambitious, involving multiple coordinated assaults, night marches through treacherous, unfamiliar terrain, and attacks on heavily fortified Turkish positions. You are part of a vast, intricate machine being wound up for a desperate gamble. The objective is clear: capture the high ground. If the Anzacs and their British allies can seize and hold those dominant ridges, they can finally overlook the Dardanelles Strait, potentially forcing the Ottoman defenses to collapse. The stakes are incredibly high. Failure would mean a continuation of the bloody stalemate, or worse. The fighting, when it erupts, is ferocious, some of the most savage and costly of the entire campaign. You advance under withering machine gun and rifle fire, through tangled barbed wire, over rocky, broken ground. The noise is deafening, a continuous roar of explosions, the rattle of machine guns, the shouts of officers, the screams of the wounded. The sun beats down mercilessly, adding to the torment. Thirst becomes an agonizing obsession, as water supplies struggle to keep up with the demand in the forward positions. The courage displayed by the attacking troops is breathtaking, but often futile against well-entrenched defenders who have the advantage of terrain and observation. You witness scenes of incredible bravery and terrible carnage. Men charge into almost certain death, driven by a combination of duty, loyalty to their comrades, and perhaps a desperate hope of breaking through. Key battles like Lone Pine, a diversionary attack launched by the Australians, become legendary for their ferocity and the sheer density of casualties in a confined space. At Lone Pine, fought largely underground in a maze of Turkish tunnels, 7 Victoria Crosses were awarded. The fighting there was hand-to-hand, brutal, and relentless, a stark contrast to the open, if dangerous, field of shell green. The light horsemen, those same men who might have been enjoying a brief game of cricket just weeks or months before, are thrown into these battles, fighting as infantry in some of the most difficult terrain. Their famous, and tragic, charge at the Neck on August 7th, where waves of dismounted light horsemen were scythed down by Turkish machine guns as they went over the top, is a particularly horrific example of the slaughter. It's a far cry from the image of them casually fielding a cricket ball. Here, their courage is expended in desperate, costly assaults against impregnable positions. Historians still ponder why exactly the August offensive, despite meticulous planning in some areas and incredible bravery from the troops, ultimately failed to achieve its strategic objectives. Was it flawed intelligence, poor coordination between the different attacking forces, the unexpectedly strong Turkish resistance, or the sheer difficulty of the terrain that doomed the operation? It was likely a combination of all these factors, a tragic example of how even the best laid plans can go awry in the chaos of war. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this period of intense fighting is the use of improvised signals and communication methods. With telephone lines constantly being cut by shell fire and runners facing almost certain death, units sometimes resorted to desperate measures like using flags, highly visible and dangerous, carrier pigeons, unreliable in the noise and confusion, or even prearranged rifle shots or flare signals, which could easily be misinterpreted. Communication breakdown was a constant problem, contributing to the confusion and lack of coordination that hampered many attacks. Imagine trying to coordinate a multi-brigade attack across miles of rugged, enemy-held terrain with nothing more reliable than a man waving a small flag under heavy fire. The dream of a decisive breakthrough, the hope that fueled the August offensive, dies hard in a welter of blood and exhaustion. The heights remain largely in Turkish hands. The casualties are immense on both sides. The brief, hopeful energy that preceded the offensive drains away, replaced by a profound sense of weariness and disillusionment. The cricket match, if anyone even remembers it amidst this new maelstrom, must seem like a distant, almost fantastical memory from another lifetime. The brutal reality of attritional warfare reasserts itself with crushing force, leaving Anzac Cove more blood-soaked and more desperate than ever. The contrast between the simple joy of that game and the horrific slaughter of the August battles could not be more stark, highlighting the schizophrenic nature of life and death on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The failure of the August offensive casts a long, dark shadow over Anzac Cove. The casualties have been horrific, and the strategic situation remains largely unchanged, if not worse, given the depleted state of the Allied forces. As the weeks turn into months, and autumn begins to give way to the harsh Gallipoli winter, a grim realization starts to dawn on the high command, far away in London. The campaign, launched with such high hopes 8 months earlier, is a bloody stalemate, a continuous drain on men and resources with no prospect of victory. The decision, when it finally comes, is both inevitable and deeply unpalatable: evacuation. You sense the change in the atmosphere before any official announcement is made. There's a subtle shift in the routine, a quiet movement of stores and equipment away from the front lines, activities conducted with a stealth that speaks of something other than routine supply operations. Rumors begin to circulate, whispered in hushed tones in the dugouts and trenches. Are they being reinforced for another push? Or is it something else? The idea of abandoning Gallipoli, after so much sacrifice, so much blood spilled for every inch of this hard-won, miserable ground, is almost unthinkable to many of the men who have endured so much here. The Gallipoli campaign had become a symbol of Allied commitment, and the decision to evacuate was fraught with political and military repercussions. The planning for the evacuation is a masterpiece of deception and meticulous organization, arguably the most successful Allied operation of the entire Gallipoli campaign. The primary challenge is to withdraw thousands of men, along with their guns and essential equipment, from under the very noses of the Ottoman defenders, who are often only yards away. If the Turks realize what is happening, the evacuation could turn into a catastrophic slaughter on the beaches. Lord Kitchener, the British Secretary of State for War, visited Gallipoli in November 1915 and, after assessing the situation, reluctantly recommended withdrawal. You become part of this elaborate ruse. The silent stunts begin elaborate deceptions designed to convince the Turks that everything is normal, or even that the Anzacs are preparing for a winter stay. Rifles are rigged with tins of water that, when they leak out, pull the trigger, creating sporadic, sniping fire to mimic the presence of sentries. Routine bombardments continue at their usual, desultory pace, even as the guns themselves are being secretly withdrawn. Men march in circles, creating the illusion of troop movements. The creativity involved is astonishing, a testament to the ingenuity that had characterized the Anzacs throughout the campaign. One famous example was the drip rifle, where a can of water would drip into another can attached to a rifle's trigger, causing it to fire periodically after the last troops had left the trench. The evacuation is planned in stages, with the bulk of the force being withdrawn silently at night. The final days are a period of intense, suppressed anxiety. You go about your duties, maintaining the facade of normal trench life, all the while knowing that the end is near. There's a strange mixture of relief and a profound sense of melancholy. Relief at the prospect of escaping this living hell, of surviving. But also a deep sadness at abandoning the graves of so many comrades, leaving them behind on this alien shore. The bonds forged in shared adversity run deep, and the thought of leaving their fallen mates feels like a betrayal, even though it's a military necessity. Historians still ponder why exactly the Ottoman forces failed to detect and disrupt the Anzac evacuation more effectively. Was it the success of the Allied deception measures, a lack of Turkish intelligence, or perhaps a reluctance on their part to provoke a desperate, last-stand battle on the beaches? The withdrawal from Anzac Cove and Suvla Bay in December 1915 was completed with remarkably few casualties, a stark contrast to the bloody cost of the landings and the subsequent fighting. A quirky tidbit from the evacuation period is the fate of the mules and remaining stores. While every effort was made to remove valuable equipment, some things had to be left behind or destroyed. There are stories of soldiers having to shoot their beloved mules to prevent them from falling into enemy hands, a heartbreaking task. Other tales speak of bully beef tins being booby-trapped, or rum jars being left as a final, cheeky, gift to the Turks, though perhaps laced with something less than festive. The final night is an eerie, almost ghostly experience. You move silently in muffled boots, down the familiar gullies and communication trenches towards the beach. The trenches are eerily empty, the usual sounds of life and activity replaced by an unsettling silence. There's no shelling, no rifle fire, just the crunch of your boots on the gravel and the hushed whispers of your comrades. Reaching the embarkation piers, you board the waiting boats in disciplined order, pushing off into the darkness, leaving Anzac Cove behind. You look back at the dark, silent silhouette of the hills, the place that has been your brutal home for so many months. There's a profound sense of an ending, not a victory, but a survival. The legacy of Gallipoli is complex and enduring. For Australia and New Zealand, it became a foundational moment in their national consciousness, a symbol of sacrifice, courage, and the forging of a distinct identity on the world stage. The military failure of the campaign was overshadowed by the perceived heroism and resilience of the soldiers who fought there. Anzac Day, April 25th, became a sacred day of remembrance. The story of the cricket match on Shell Green, though a tiny footnote in the grand sweep of the campaign, became part of that legacy, a symbol of the Anzac spirit, that ability to find light in the darkness, to endure, and to retain a spark of humanity even in the face of unimaginable horror. The silent, ghostly withdrawal from those shores marked the end of a chapter, but the echoes of Gallipoli would resonate for a century and beyond. The evacuation from Anzac Cove is complete. You're on a ship, heading away from that rugged, unforgiving coastline, leaving behind the graves of thousands of comrades and the indelible memories of months of hardship and struggle. The immediate sense is one of relief, of course, the lifting of an immense burden. But as the shores of Gallipoli recede into the gray Aegean mist, the story of what happened there, particularly those small, human moments like the Shell Green cricket match, begins its journey into legend. That game, played with improvised equipment on a shell-pocked patch of earth, under the intermittent gaze and fire of the enemy, becomes more than just a memory for those who witnessed it. It transforms into an emblem of resilience, of the stubborn human need for normalcy, and of a particular kind of courage that finds expression not just in battle, but in the refusal to let the spirit be crushed. The tale of the Anzac cricketers at Gallipoli starts to be told and retold, first among the surviving soldiers themselves, then filtering back home through letters and word of mouth, and eventually finding its way into newspapers and historical accounts. It captures the imagination because it's so unexpected, so beautifully incongruous. In the vast, grim tapestry of the Great War, with its millions dead and its unprecedented industrial slaughter, the image of men playing cricket in such a deadly arena stands out as a poignant symbol of the human spirit's tenacity. The mainstream historical fact is that the story of the Shell Green game, while perhaps embellished over time as all good stories are, is rooted in genuine events and reflects the documented efforts of soldiers to maintain morale through sport and recreation, even in the most challenging circumstances. The echoes of that match resonate through subsequent military history. The idea of soldiers finding ways to engage in sport and recreation, even in active war zones, is not unique to Gallipoli, but the Shell Green story gives it a particularly sharp focus. It reminds us that soldiers are not just fighting machines, they are individuals with pastimes, passions, and a longing for the familiar comforts of home. You can imagine soldiers in later conflicts, in different parts of the world, hearing the story of the Gallipoli cricketers and perhaps being inspired to organize their own impromptu games, their own small acts of defiance against the grim realities of war. Remember those light horsemen, accustomed to wide open spaces, now finding their release in a few overs on a dusty patch of ground. Their legacy is in that adaptability. The story also becomes a part of the broader Anzac legend, contributing to the national identities of Australia and New Zealand. It speaks to qualities that those nations came to value: ingenuity, a laconic sense of humor in the face of adversity, courage that is understated rather than flamboyant, and above all, mateship. The men playing on Shell Green weren't just individuals. They were a team, relying on each other, sharing the risks and the brief moments of joy. This emphasis on collective spirit, rather than individual heroism alone, is a key element of the Anzac tradition. Historians still ponder why exactly this particular story, among many tales of bravery and endurance from Gallipoli, has achieved such iconic status. Perhaps it's the inherent drama of the scene, the stark contrast between the peaceful, almost pastoral imagery of cricket and the brutal reality of the surrounding warfare. Or maybe it's the David and Goliath aspect, the under-equipped, outnumbered Anzacs finding a way to assert their spirit against a formidable enemy and an unforgiving landscape. Whatever the reason, the Shell Green game has become a shorthand for the Anzac experience, a small, human-scale story that illuminates larger truths about war, courage, and the resilience of the human spirit. A quirky or fringe tidbit connected to the legacy of such events is how they sometimes inspire art, literature, and even film, decades later. A seemingly minor incident, like a cricket game under fire, can spark the imagination of a writer or filmmaker, leading to works that explore the human dimensions of war in a way that grand strategic histories cannot. These artistic interpretations help to keep the memory alive and introduce it to new generations, ensuring that the echoes of Shell Green continue to be heard. You might even imagine a future where a slightly eccentric director decides to make a film titled The Last Over at Anzac, focusing entirely on that single, absurd game. The men who played in that match, and those who watched, would eventually return home, or move on to other battlefields of the Great War. They would carry with them the scars of Gallipoli, both visible and invisible. But they would also carry memories, perhaps of the sun on their faces during a brief lull in the shelling, the satisfying thud of bat and ball, the shared laughter with mates. These memories, however fleeting, would be a testament to their ability to find light in the darkest of places. The cricket match on Shell Green was more than just a game. It was an act of faith in life itself, a defiant assertion of humanity in the face of overwhelming inhumanity. Its echoes are a reminder that even in war, the spirit can find ways to play, to connect, and to endure. The campaign itself was a bitter failure, a tragic waste of life. Yet, from that failure, something intangible but powerful was born. A sense of identity, a legacy of courage, and stories like the one of Shell Green, which continue to inspire and move us. The dust has long since settled on that improvised pitch, the sounds of battle have faded, but the echo of that unlikely cricket game, played on the edge of oblivion, still whispers to us across the years. The sun begins to dip lower now, casting longer, softer shadows, much like those that crept across Shell Green as the light faded on that remarkable day. The urgency of the story lessens, the sharp edges of memory begin to blur, replaced by a more gentle, reflective mood. You feel the tension easing from your shoulders, the imaginary weight of the Brodie helmet lifting. The sounds of distant battle, the crack of rifles and the thud of shells, which have been the unsettling soundtrack to our journey, now recede, replaced by the quiet hum of your own surroundings. Think of those men, those Anzacs, after the game, returning to the stark reality of their trenches, the brief joy of cricket already a poignant memory. Yet, perhaps that memory, that small, shared experience of defiant normalcy, offered a sliver of comfort, a reminder of a world beyond the mud and the blood, a world they longed to return to. The game itself was a tiny act of creation in a landscape dominated by destruction, a fleeting moment of peace carved out from the heart of war. As you settle deeper into your own comfort, let the images of Gallipoli soften and fade. Let the rugged, sun-scorched hills grow distant, the narrow, crowded trenches empty out. The echoes of that improbable cricket match, the shouts of the players, the thwack of the makeshift bat, all dissolve into the quiet of your room. The courage, the resilience, the absurd humor of those men let it settle as a gentle understanding, a quiet appreciation for the human spirit's ability to endure, and even to find moments of grace, in the most trying of circumstances. The war eventually ended, as all wars do. Peace, however hard won, returned to those shores. The wild thyme and scrub began to reclaim the scarred earth, softening the harsh lines of trenches and shell holes. And the story of the cricketers of Gallipoli became a gentle whisper in the annals of a terrible conflict, a reminder that even in darkness, small lights can shine. Now, as you drift towards sleep, may your own dreams be peaceful, far removed from the dust and echoes of that distant, sun-baked cove.